New York City had an on-time budget this year by the skin of its teeth, but the last-minute negotiations were anything but easy. The Point starts right now. Julie Menin is the Speaker of the New York City Council, and this was her first budget negotiation. But there's been so much that has happened since the budget that we have to start with that.
Yes.
First of all, there's a major outbreak of Legionnaire's disease on the Upper East Side, which happens to be your district.
Yes.
Now, I know that you're not satisfied with what the city's doing. You've written a letter to the mental health commissioner, the health commissioner, asking for more. What are you looking for, and what do you think people need to know to protect themselves?
Well, Marcia, this is a very serious case. We have to remember that certainly on the east side of Manhattan, we have a large senior population, and the seniors are more susceptible to contracting Legionnaires and more susceptible to dying from Legionnaires. What I am concerned about is, first of all, the health department has still not been able to identify the source, which is deeply concerning. We're almost a week into this crisis. Secondly, I am insisting, and I sent a letter to the health commissioner last night about this, and I've been insisting at every town hall we've had, that they start disinfecting now. Why wait? Every single day that they wait to mandate that these towers be disinfected is another day that more and more people are contracting this. As of yesterday, there were 28 cases, 21 of which are now in the hospital. This is very serious, with a 10% mortality rate.
But you're not satisfied with disinfecting the water towers where there's been an outbreak. You want more towers to be disinfected just in case.
I do, because right now they've tested about 87% of the towers, but they still don't have the test results back, and 13% they haven't tested at all. So why not start with the 13% and start with the towers where they don't have the test results back? By the way, they know where the epicenter is, so certainly disinfecting immediately around that area is mission critical. So I don't understand this kind of response. I've been very vocal about it. People are at risk of dying, and we now have 21 cases, and 28 cases, 21 of which have required hospitalization. Every single hour that passes, more and more people are going to get sick from this.
So why aren't they taking it more seriously?
I don't know. It's been very frustrating, and my constituents are very frustrated as well, and that is why we are demanding an increase, a more proactive, aggressive response on this.
So from moving to a Legionnaire's crisis to another crisis, a building collapse in Midtown that has sort of paralyzed Midtown in a very critical area. I wonder, this raises a lot of questions. First of all, the quality of the building inspections, and I wonder if it's something that the City Council wants to investigate and maybe change how we inspect buildings.
Well, certainly. We know that there were numerous violations in this incident. This also, there was non-union labor there, and so there is a concern about where corners cut, what was really happening. We know that the Buildings Department is doing an investigation. Obviously, from the council perspective, we are going to be looking at this to see, do we need to perhaps legislate additional standards? Do we need to tighten certain regulations to make sure that something like this never happens again? This was an office to residential conversion, of which there'll be many in the Midtown area. And so this is something that we really need to, we fully support the office to residential conversion and building more affordable housing. That is absolutely critical. But we need to get some answers in terms of what DOB knew, what they did in terms of enforcement or lack thereof.
But it also raises another question. You have a lot of people who say, not in my backyard. They're really worried about construction. And when you have something like this happen, doesn't it shake the foundations of public confidence about how things are being carried out? And could it affect future office buildings to residential conversions?
Well, we have a lot of questions about what DOB knew, about the violations, about how quickly they were corrected, about additional inspections. There seemed to, at cursory look, be a lack of fines that were assessed here. So these are all questions that we're going to be looking at. We want to make sure the public feels safe. We don't want a situation where people are concerned about this. And obviously, the building collapse was very, very concerning. So we need to get to the bottom of the answers. We need an expedited investigation. And the council's looking at what oversight we will be doing in terms of perhaps a legislative fix and additional regulations that need to happen so we can assure the public that these office to residential conversions are indeed safe.
So I guess the question also is, there was an over-reliance, it seems, on outside non-city inspectors. And the question is that a good thing? Do there have to be more controls in place to check up on the non-city inspectors who are doing apparently a lot of the work?
Yes, we absolutely need to do that. We need to make sure that the buildings department is backfilling the vacancies, that there's not a delay at OMB in terms of hiring. We've been hearing at a lot of agencies that there's a real backlog at OMB in terms of hiring into the vacant positions. And so to the extent that DOB is outsourcing those inspections, that is of great concern to the city council. And so these are all questions we have. We will be holding a hearing on this to really get some answers.
So I'd also like to talk to you about another thing. You know, during the campaign, the mayor promised that he would look at the no-bid contracts in the Department of Education,
right?
Because there's about $13 billion
exactly
worth of no-bid contracts for all kinds of services. Now, I know that you have been trying to get some answers from the Department of Education, and you've come up against a brick wall. What are you trying to do about that?
So this is a huge area of concern right now, Marcia. Back in February, the council passed my bill that eradicates the long-term use of no-bid contracts, because we know, for example, in the de Blasio administration, they suspended the use of no-bid contracts 100 times during COVID and spent about $7 billion on protective equipment. We know in the Adams administration, no-bid contract was suspended during the asylum seeker crisis to the tune of about $4 billion. So my bill prohibits a long-term use of no-bid contracts and restricts them to an emergency. Now we have a situation which, as you point out, $12.9 billion of the education budget is spent on these outside contracts, many of which are no-bid. I have been demanding a copy of these contracts since March. We have not received the contract still from the DOE.
How is that acceptable?
It's not acceptable because it interferes with the council's oversight provisions. They have given us every excuse under the book. The first excuse was it would take too much time. Well, it doesn't take too much time. We're talking about 600 contracts that literally is a couple hours of work to download them onto a file and provide them to the city council. Then they said they didn't have the staff to do it. Let's remember, DOE is the largest city agency budget, about $40 billion. You can't tell me you don't have a staff member who can download the contracts.
But also, if you're trying to find efficiencies, doesn't it behoove the city council to look at where the money is being spent? Because maybe you could find ways to do it cheaper.
And that's why we want the contract, so we can see, is there a duplication of work? Are there efficiencies that in no way cut services, but that where we're able to actually save money moving forward? So we've been asking for these contracts for months. Yesterday, I sent yet another letter to the chancellor demanding that they provide these contracts and demanding a production schedule on when we're going to get these contracts. This is inexcusable.
But the chancellor was at a city council budget hearing. He was asked about it, and still nothing?
No, still nothing. We just get more excuses. So this is not going to go away for us. We are going to continue ratcheting up the pressure until we get the contracts, because that is performing our oversight. This is $12.9 billion of the education budget on these outside consultants. And we really want to get to the bottom of, well, what is the city paying for all these consultants? We also learned at the hearing that DOE has never actually audited these contracts. So that was another thing that came out, which is, why is there no auditing of these contracts? So there are a lot of questions we have. And again, it is incumbent upon DOE to provide the council with these contracts. We're not asking for an analysis of the contracts. We're merely asking a copy of the contracts.
So let's turn to yet another hot button issue for the council, and that is what you're going to do about the carriages, the horse carriages, after a tourist died. I know there's been a recent study by the Central Park Conservancy that shows New Yorkers really don't want the horse carriages. But at the council, there's only 16 sponsors so far, and that would mean that you need another 10 in order to pass the bill. Where are we on that?
Well, I think support is definitely growing for a rider's law. I talked to many of the members, and I believe more members are going to be signing on. Look, we need to take some action. I mean, what happened with this tourist death was completely unconscionable, unacceptable, and preventable. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And so we do need to take some action. We are having a hearing next week, and the hearing is our opportunity to basically talk to all the stakeholders. I've been meeting with TWU, I've been meeting with the Central Park Conservancy, I've been meeting with NICLAS and other animal rights advocates, and I am confident that we can put forward a good solution here.
All right, on that note, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. But up next, the men fighting to get the homeless off the streets, out of shelters, and into permanent housing. Dave Giffen is the executive director of the Coalition for the Homeless. You know, I was going to ask you if homelessness is getting worse, but then I read your report, which startled me, and it said that almost 195,000 people used the Department of Homeless Services during 2025. And I was astonished by that number. That's an increase, is it not?
It's a big increase, and it's the most that we've seen since the crisis of mass homelessness began in New York City about 50 years ago. And just over the 4 years of the Adams administration, we saw about a 27% increase in the number of people using the shelter system each night. But why?
I mean, is this because of the asylum seekers? What is fueling the fact that so many people can't find housing?
Well, the asylum seeker issue is an interesting one, but we actually pulled those numbers out and looked only at what we refer to as longer-term New Yorkers and how homelessness has been increasing among that population. And the problem is that the city has been failing to actually address the underlying causes of mass homelessness.
Which is?
The lack of affordable housing. And, you know, interestingly, over those 4 years of the Adams administration, DSS, the Department of Social Services, did a better job of placing people into permanent housing from the shelter system. So more people left shelters, but still the total number went up because more New Yorkers are falling into homelessness every day.
But as the numbers increased, was that an increase because people couldn't afford the rent, or was it also exacerbated by the fact that we also, during the Adams administration, had a huge influx of asylum seekers?
Well, again, we count those numbers separately, and the number of asylum seekers was huge for a while, but then has been going down fairly steadily.
But they were looking for permanent housing, too.
They're looking for permanent housing, too, and they need help as well. And there's still thousands of asylum seekers in shelters that need help finding housing and jobs and getting their immigration status dealt with. But even apart from the asylum seekers, the number of longer-term New Yorkers that were losing their homes kept increasing because there's simply no housing for them. They can't afford to pay rents in New York.
So was it increasing costs not only of rent, but you know, food and fuel and all the other things that were adding to the inaffordability to stay in a home?
Exactly right.
Or was it the decrease in the amount of options that you have to live where you could live?
I mean, the cost of housing in New York City is obviously the biggest driver of poverty in New York City. It's the single largest expense that any household has. But all of those other costs contribute to the inability of a family to pay rent.
But let's ask this question. I know it's going to be politically difficult, but it seems to me that administration after administration, including the present administration, especially, they focus on affordable housing for the working class. But I think that leaves out homeless people, people in shelter. And so are we directing our money and our ability to build housing to a smaller group of people than we need to? Does it need to be expanded? And if so, how do we do that?
Well, Marcia, you identified really what the core of the problem is. And, you know, we all agree that New York has huge affordability problems that impact everybody who works here. But there is no way to talk about affordability without talking about housing, and there is no way to talk about affordability in housing without talking about the people most impacted by that, which are the roughly 350,000 people tonight are without homes in New York City. That's insane. And the only way to address that is to put city and state resources into creating more housing for those people. So the working class New Yorkers need housing, absolutely, but they're in housing. What about all of those hundreds of thousands of people who have no housing tonight?
But why does the city focus on the working class and not look at the people who are in shelters? I mean, when you see the number, it's almost 200,000 people used the shelter system last year.
Yes.
Wouldn't you try to find housing for them as well? I mean, the rent freeze doesn't affect the people who are living in shelter.
Exactly right. And we want to engage in every kind of prevention technique we can. So rent freeze is good, helping people with to pay off their rent arrears and to stay into their homes, absolutely. But I wouldn't say we need to help those people as well. I would say we need to help those people first. That needs to be the priority. Help the people who are in most need. How do you change that? How do you get the government to change that? I wish I could give you an easy answer to that, but we try to call the scope of the problem to the attention of city officials and to get them to focus resources where they're most needed. So we have been talking about the City FEPS program and the fact that this is a housing voucher program that gives money to people so that they can find housing. And the point that you and housing homeless advocates like Christine Quinn have made is that it's so much cheaper to give them a voucher than to put them in a shelter. So if that's the case, why don't you expand the program more? And why was it so hard to get the administration to increase it to include another 30,000 people? The administration said that it was an issue of dollars and cents, that they didn't have the money to do it. But I would counter that saying, look, ultimately, it's what is the priority of the city. Childcare was a stated priority of the city, and they found the billions of dollars to deal with that. There's proof of concept right there that if something is a priority, you can find a way to do it. So we just need to make homelessness more of a priority for the current administration. But if the numbers are very simple, $54 a night for a voucher and 200-something to stay a night in a shelter, it doesn't make sense not to do the voucher. I mean, it doesn't make fiscal sense to me. Maybe I'm wrong. What am I not seeing? You're seeing it. It doesn't make sense not to do it. The shelter costs are there because there is a legal right to shelter in New York City. So the city is legally compelled to provide shelter for every homeless individual and family who doesn't have a home. That is a good thing. We don't want anyone to be on the streets. So the city does not have a choice. They have to spend that money. But we don't want the city to spend all this money on shelters. We would rather see the shelter population going down by providing more people with city FEPS and by building more housing. But homeless people are not simply people who live in shelters. They're people who live on the street as well. And under the HOPE report, there were 4,991 people on the street the day they did the report. Yeah, no, that is a huge portion of the crisis as well. And I'll say that that number is a terrific undercount. There's far more people who are unsheltered in New York City. They're just not able to count them. But it's not that we don't have a solution for individuals like that. Supportive housing, which is permanent housing with on-site social services, is a great solution for that population. But again, it's not adequately funded and it's not adequately run. Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. But our conversations continue right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. Thank you for joining me. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts where my local library was my summer camp. I biked there in the morning, took out a book, then spent the day exploring the world. To me, it was heaven. But what do libraries mean to New Yorkers? They're weighing in on your point. When was the last time you went to the library?
All the time. I'm a big library goer.
It's been a while.
A few years ago with my granddaughter.
To be honest, it's been a long time.
I read books. I actually have a book from the library now.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I just went last week to print something.
I live in the library.
You would live in the library?
I did all my research, everything in the library.
Oh, it's been a long time because we don't live here anymore.
Where do you live?
We live over in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But we still have our library cards.
How often do we go to the library, Rumi? Like almost once a week.
Once a week?
Yes.
That's great. What's the library good for?
Well, it's good for research, excellent for research.
Reading books.
You know, they're good for gathering places.
The exhibits, community, encouraging literacy, encouraging history, and for democracy.
I guess teaching the kids how to, maneuver around and look for what they're looking for.
It's good for getting books online.
And they're fabulous.
Does New York, is that what you use your library card for now?
Yes.
For books, for the internet, if you need a computer, for just some alone time, study time, for everything.
Usually research, taking a nap, depends on who you are.
They're good for the kids. They have a lot of kids activities. Yeah, he likes to borrow books about what?
Star Wars and Legoland, and also it helps me to read.
Do you think New York City needs more libraries?
Absolutely.
No, because they got quite a few around where I live.
I feel like there's enough.
Probably not.
Because nobody goes.
I get my stuff online.
Do you think New York City needs more libraries?
Yes.
How
I think kids need to go to the library more instead of on iPads.
I think we need to get back into reading instead of, being on the cell phone.
Yes, definitely.
How come?
Because people need to be educated in order to be citizens, in order to protect our democracy.
Right now, I've been thinking about that question before because with the advent of AI and everything, information has definitely gotten easier to access. So I think libraries, for the sake of a peaceful place to study, yes.
What would bring more people to the library?
That's a good question. Air conditioning on hot days like tonight?
I guess more events at the libraries.
That's a tough one.
A pretty girl.
Maybe, yeah, definitely.
Maybe more advertisement, marketing, so that they will know what's going on in the library, because only people that goes to the library knows the activities.
Incentives, more community activities, free things, probably get them in there, I think the New York libraries were fabulous.
Maybe a little bit more promotion, a little bit more advertisement. I feel like not a lot of people take advantage of the libraries.
They probably don't know where they are.
It's a hidden gem.